Do you want to know the secrets of the Nephilim? I will reveal them to you now.
I'm trying to film a video. So if you've been watching my previous videos, you know that there is an ancient theory that Satan, in an effort to stop the Messiah from coming through the bloodline of humanity, corrupted humanity's bloodline by orchestrating an event where fallen angels mated with human women in order to create offspring. That offspring, many people believe, is called the Nephilim. The Nephilim, there's a lot of crazy theories about them, like that they were the ones who helped build the ancient wonders of the world, like the pyramids, that they were giants. Some people even believe that they are connected to alien encounters. Is any of that true, or is that all just crazy Bible conspiracy? We're about to find out right now. Stay tuned.
The world is asking, is God mean? He flooded the whole earth full of people, including women and children. He sends people to hell, and some say that in the Old Testament he endorsed violence, slavery, and even genocide. There is so much suffering in the world that he hasn't stopped. How can a God like this be a God of love? If these are questions you have been asking, then I invite you to come along on this series, Is God Mean?, as we take a journey to discover the truth of God's character. There are answers, and we're revealing them now.
Hey guys, welcome to Is God Mean?, a video series to help you understand God's seemingly harsh actions in the Old Testament. I'm your host, Chris Ulery from Divine Romance Ministries, and don't worry, I'm not actually a Nephilim. This is just a brilliant disguise. But that does bring up the topic for today's video. We are in the third part of our series, and today we're talking about who were the Nephilim, the mysterious race of giants in the Bible. If you missed our last video, we were talking about who were the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6. Were they angels? Were they men? We also talked about the nature of spiritual bodies and whether they're actually capable of procreating, as some people think that the Genesis 6 account suggests. So if you haven't yet seen that video, I'd highly recommend you to go check it out right here. Then after you're done with that one, come back and finish this one, because this one is going to build on the foundation that video laid. And I do want to let you know that I am going to be covering a lot of in-depth details, some pretty technical stuff, so I am going to have to be reading from a teleprompter to be sure that I don't leave anything out. And if you want to get your hands on that script along with every verse that I reference, maps, pictures, all that kind of stuff, then head to my website, isgodmean.com, where you can download that full study guide. And you can also check out the book if you're interested, but it'll be very easy for you to follow along that way. All right, let's get into it. Let me put on my serious face now. Boom. All right, here we go. To the studio. We're picking up in Genesis 6, verse 4, that says, "The Nephilim were on the earth both in those days and afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of mankind, who bore children to them. They were the powerful men of old, the famous men." If we continue along the angel view theory of Genesis 6 that we began investigating in the last video, this scripture tells us that angels and women married and had offspring together. Were those offspring the Nephilim mentioned here in verse 4? Let's investigate to find out. The word Nephilim in the Hebrew is actually Nephilim, and it's a pretty ambiguous word. We don't know much about it because it only appears in 2 scriptures in the entire Bible. Some scholars believe that it could originate from the word nephal, which means to fall. So some translate Nephilim as the fallen ones. Others think of them as bullies who would fall on their enemies, or those that cause others to fall down. However, strictly speaking, the plural participle would be either of these 2 versions that you see on your screen now, and not Nephilim. So some scholars have pointed out that the related Aramaic language, which small portions of the Old Testament were written in, has a noun that would be Nephilim in its plural form, and in Hebrew would translate to Nephilim. This Aramaic word means giant, and is also the Aramaic word for the constellation Orion, the giant hunter of mythology. Honestly, it's all somewhat speculative as there's no way for us to confirm one way or another. Either way, the Greek translators decided to use the word gigantus, which in English translates as giants, which is what most of us read in our English Bibles. The Greek translators may have chosen that word because of the context Nephilim is used in the only other place it appears in the Bible, the book of Numbers. This is Numbers chapter 13, verses 32 and 33. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, The land, though which we have gone to search it, is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of a great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. So Moses sent spies to check out the land of Canaan, to see if the children of Israel could take the land. And this is the report that the spies bring back, that there are men of great stature that made them look like grasshoppers in comparison. They then relate these men of great stature to the Nephilim found in Genesis 6, verse 4. It is likely because of this connection that the Greek translators chose to translate Nephilim as giants. It also seems to imply that these giants were somehow connected to the Genesis 6 Nephilim. So many people conclude that the union of angels marrying human women led to this giant race of beings, hereditary clans of giants. I know this sounds like a sci-fi movie, but the Bible is pretty clear that there were giants around in the Old Testament. We all know Goliath. There was also Ishbi-Benob, Saph, Lami, the unnamed giant with 24 fingers and toes, Og, the king of Bashan, whose bed was over 13 feet long, Shishai, Ahim, and Talmai, and many more. The Bible actually mentions entire tribes of giants that were surrounding the promised land that Joshua and later David had to wipe out before inheriting the land. These tribes are listed as the Amorites, the Emim, Zamzumim, Rephaim, Nephilim, and the Anakim. Now the terms Nephilim and Rephaim may just be generic terms for giants, but all of the others seem to be specific family clans of giants. While portions of the angel view do require a bit of speculation, the existence of hereditary families of giants in the Bible is actually one of the strongest arguments for this view, in my opinion. But before I go into all of this, I want to say that what I personally believe is actually a little bit different than what I'm about to share right now. But before I can get to what I personally believe, I need to first lay out the argument for these popular views in order to show you how I navigated all this info to arrive at my own personal beliefs. So I'm just explaining these popular theories right now to lay a foundation. We will start finding the holes in their logic later in order to get to the truth, but first, let's just look at the popular theories. So this angel view of Genesis 6 is one of the only possible explanations given in the Bible of where the giants come from. The talk of giants is pretty straightforward and common in the Bible, and it would be very difficult to try to just explain away their existence. This union of celestial beings with human women is definitely one of the only obvious explanations of where they could come from. However, there are some other more abstract and speculative theories of where they could have originated from. Here's a list of scriptures in the Bible that talk about giants. Obviously, I can't cover all of these right now in this one video, but you can use this list to go research giants for yourself, which I would highly suggest that you do. You can also find this list, along with every other scripture I reference in this video, in the free study guide on my website, isgodmean.com. So go check out the website and download that free study guide as soon as you finish this video. So the Bible makes it pretty clear that these giants definitely existed. What it makes less clear is where did these giants come from? Like I said, there are many theories other than just the theory that angels mated with humans, and I'd like to go over a few of them right now. One of those theories is just the simple genetics of a more perfect Earth. The Earth in those days was very different from the way it is now, and it was much more conducive to life. People in those days were living to nearly 1,000 years old, and fossils show that it was not rare for some life forms to be 40% larger back then than their modern-day counterparts. So maybe some people were just really big, and that passed down through the generations and through some clans. Another theory is genetic modification. Think GMO. Those that adhere to this view use the story of the cluster of grapes that was so large that it took 2 men with poles to carry them as an example of how they had genetically modified the grapes. However, that could have also been the simple genetics of a more perfect earth. But those that believe in genetic modification believe that the sons of God, angels, were teaching people how to mix species and genetically modify creatures. They believe this because it is specifically mentioned in multiple extra-biblical texts, such as Jasher and the Book of Enoch. I don't believe these extra-biblical texts are authoritative or divine at all, but the stories from these books were common knowledge for many people in Bible days, and it helps give us a peek into what their worldview would have been. I will say that some of the theories in this genetic modification camp get pretty out there. They believe people used genetic modification to create some of the more ferocious carnivorous dinosaurs. They also think that the sons of God were teaching them all kinds of celestial technologies, and that's how so many of the ancient wonders of the world, like the pyramids, came to be. They also think the verse that says, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be," in Matthew 24, could possibly refer to all of the genetic mutations that scientists are starting to experiment with now to create hybrid creatures. They believe that just as in the days of Noah, we will once again have hybrid beings thanks to genetic modification sciences. Again, I'm not sure that I personally buy into all that, but I do think that it's at least worth taking into consideration. And it is truly shocking and oftentimes even disturbing what is being produced from the field of genetic modification sciences. There are many theories out there, and I can't cover all of them in this one video, but I'll give you one more. The Adam and Eve's firstborn theory. Some say Adam and Eve may have had children before Cain while they still lived in the Garden of Eden before they had sinned. If this were true, when Adam and Eve sinned, that sin wouldn't have been held against their children that were already in the Garden of Eden. Thus, when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, their firstborn children could have remained with perfect genetics not tainted by sin. It is assumed these children would probably have been larger and stronger than the lines of humanity that were corrupted by sin. People that believe this view think that it is this pre-fall offspring of Adam and Eve that are the sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6, and that it is why their union with the fallen lines of man, the daughters of Cain, led to the birth of giants. I do not subscribe to this theory because although the Bible does not explicitly tell us that Cain was Adam and Eve's firstborn, I think the context clues of Eve's proclamation after Cain, "With the Lord's help, I have produced a man," makes it pretty clear it was her firstborn. And we know that Cain was born outside of the garden. One thing is for sure, whoever you believe the giants are, whether a hybrid, half angelic, half man race, genetically modified creatures, or just a product of an older, more perfect world, the Bible talks about them a lot. And not only does the Bible talk about them, but so do scientists, archaeologists, anthropologists, paleontologists, explorers, historians, and even journalists. The New York Times alone has published nearly 60 articles documenting the discovery of giant human bones. Now, I'm not going to get into all of that because there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there surrounding this topic, and you have to be very careful while sifting through the fiction to get to the truth. But if you're into that sort of thing, there is no shortage of information for you to research regarding giant human skeletons, giant footprints discovered alongside dinosaur footprints, journal entries of encounters with giants from ancient explorers, and even respected historians like Josephus reference the giants in their works. And even more convincing than those things are the thousands of megalithic structures from around the world, such as pyramids, temples, and tombs. These ancient wonders of the world have drawn so much attention as archaeologists admit that without our modern day tools and technology, we could not recreate these structures today. These structures are a sign of a higher intelligence and a capability that we humans don't possess without the aid of modern technology. Where would these early civilizations have gotten that kind of advanced knowledge? If you watch the History Channel, you've probably seen ancient aliens with a guide telling you that it came from celestial beings who visited Earth, and there is a theory that that's exactly what happened, but those celestial beings weren't aliens, but were instead angels. Personally, I don't know a lot about all those things, so I'm going to stick with the Bible for my studies. But it is interesting to note that nearly every people group around the world has a mythology for two events: a global flood and half-man, half-celestial demigods that came from God sleeping with women. Some may say that's coincidence, but others believe it is the result of many retellings of a universal truth. There's one more issue that believers of the angel view have to tackle. If all the Nephilim were drowned in the flood, how did they appear again after the flood? If the existence of giants is the strongest argument for the angel view, the giants' continued existence after the flood is the argument's greatest weakness. As always, there are several theories out there of how they reappeared. One theory among Jewish tradition is that angels descended again on Mount Hermon and once again mated with women, starting the process all over again. The obvious weakness to this argument is, well then why isn't it still happening today? Some answer that by saying because after seeing the punishment the fallen angels received after their transgressions, all the other angels were too scared to follow in their footsteps. But I would think they would have gotten that message loud and clear after it happened the first time. Others say it no longer happens because God blocked physical demonic intervention, and that very well may be the case. However, if that is the case, I think God would have done that at the time of the flood, rather than waiting for this whole process to happen a second time. With that in mind, does the Bible give us any indication that the Nephilim will return? Some suggest that the angels who get released during the tribulation, as Revelation 9 predicts, could lead to the birth of more Nephilim. There are several ancient, non-biblical texts that suggest this. You can see those on your screen now. And some traditions claim that Antichrist himself will be a hybrid, although the only way to arrive at these conclusions is by pure speculation or via non-biblical ancient text, as the Bible itself never mentions, to my knowledge at least, these assumptions. But for those that do take the extra-biblical text seriously, they say that the threat of hybrid offspring could help explain why Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24 that it would be terrible for pregnant women and nursing mothers during those times. To me, it seems pretty obvious that Jesus was just acknowledging that with the global meltdown and intensified suffering, that it would be a very difficult time to parent a child. Not that it would be terrible because your child is a hybrid. I do believe, however, that after the rapture, Satan will use the lie of alien abduction as a deception to fool the masses and to give a secular explanation for the disappearance of potentially millions of people. There are some people that believe that because of this alien abduction deception, that these spirits mentioned in Revelation chapter 9 that are released during the tribulation will claim themselves to be aliens. I have no way of knowing if that's true or not, but it definitely would not surprise me if that is exactly what happens. There is another theory on how the Nephilim returned after the flood that has nothing to do with fallen angels returning to mate with women, but rather implies that the Nephilim bloodline was preserved through the flood. This theory suggests that Noah's son Ham married a woman that came from a family line that had been contaminated by this mixing of angels with humans. So basically, the theory is that Ham married a Nephilim and brought her on the ark with him. I simply don't believe this theory, but the people that do come to this conclusion because the Bible doesn't specifically tell us that all of Noah's family was righteous, but only that Noah was, and it only specifically mentions that Noah was perfect in his generations, which some interpret as meaning his bloodline was pure. So we can assume that Noah and his children were pure, as a righteous man wouldn't have mated with a Nephilim, but we aren't told explicitly that the women his sons married were of a pure bloodline. We're never even told that his sons were righteous men. The Bible actually seems to imply that Noah was the last righteous man on earth. However, I personally think this theory is most likely nonsense, because if the angel view is accurate, and there really was a half-man, half-angel race contaminating the planet, and part of the purpose of the flood was to wipe out that demonic race before it destroyed humanity, then why would God allow it to still live on through Ham's wife after the flood? That seems completely counterproductive, which God's ways are higher than my ways, but from my current perspective, that seems like it would have been an oversight, and we all know that God doesn't make mistakes. so I don't believe this one. The last theory I want to mention is that some people think that the half-man, half-angel hybrid race only existed before the flood, and the giants that we see after the flood are just the result of genetic mutation or modification, and are not an actual biological descendant of the ancient hybrid race from antediluvian times. Okay, now that we've laid out the basic theories, let's investigate to see which of these theories seems most realistic. Let's start by looking at the weaknesses in each theory. The first problem that I see with the Sethite theory, and all the variations of that theory that have the sons of God being human men, is simply the jump you have to make to assume that the sons of God is referring to a specific subgroup of humanity. It just seems like a very unnatural reading of the text. We talked about this a lot in the last video, so I'm not going to elaborate on that again here. The second weakness is the existence of giants. With the Sethite view, we are never given an origin story in the Bible for the giants. And with as much as the giants are talked about, it does seem odd that we'd never be told how they arrived on the scene. We've looked at some theories out there that try to explain this in this video, but they are purely speculation. I do have to say though that if the giants are just human men, that would make it easy to explain how they appeared even after the flood. Now let's look at some of the weaknesses of the angel view and all of its variations. So I always grew up hearing that Satan is just a counterfeiter. I learned that he can't create on his own, but that he just tries to counterfeit everything that God creates. And while we don't have a verse that I'm aware of that explicitly states this, when you study his actions throughout the Bible, that accusation seems to be true. So the idea that Satan would actually have the power to create his own race just seems to contrast everything I've always believed about Satan. It just doesn't sit quite right with me. However, saying that it just doesn't sit quite right with me is a far cry from having actual biblical evidence against this theory. Still, it's kind of a hard pill for me to swallow. One explanation I heard that did help me with this concept a little is that it was God who created biology and gave human beings the ability to reproduce, and that Satan was forced to work within the confines of the biology that God had already created because he lacks the ability to create his own. Thus, even with the angel view, Satan still never created his own biological rules or realities, but simply worked with what God had already put in place. In this way, Satan would once again just be attempting to counterfeit God's creation. That explanation did help me be a little more accepting. One thing that I actually disagree with most scholars about is that I think that if this theory is true, I believe that the Nephilim had the option to choose to live righteously and honor God to avoid judgment. I don't think God would allow a race to be created without them being given the opportunity to choose to love him. However, it is clear that even if they were given the freedom to choose, that none of them made the right choice, as the Bible clearly tells us that Noah was the last righteous man on earth. They obviously were all born with a thirst for evil, just like their parents. The second weakness with the angel view is the appearance of giants again after the flood. If giants are supposed to be a hybrid of angels and humans, then how did they reappear after the flood? Again, we explored some theories in this video, and again, they were all pure speculation. Honestly, I would never think less of anyone for believing any of the variations of either the Sethite view or the angel view. Both have the Bible as the basis for their arguments, and I can't prove or disprove either one. I believe it is folly to allow this issue to cause division and strife among the body of Christ. There is a third view that kind of combines the angel view and the Sethite view together that I personally believe more effectively handles the weaknesses that both of these arguments present on their own. But I'm out of time on this video, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next video where I break down the third and final view that we are going to cover on Genesis 6 concerning the sons of God and the Nephilim, and the variation that I personally believe is the truth. Don't miss it. I'll see you in the next video.
In this video, we covered all of the major theories surrounding the mysterious Nephilim. In the next video in this playlist, I'll introduce a brand new theory that I believe reveals the truth of who the Nephilim really are.